What's going on, guys? Today we'll be talking about the Sony A9 in 2020. Now I'm talking about the Sony A9, the original one. This camera is 3 years old now. And is it still worth it? Well, it sort of depends. Let's get into this camera. The AF of the camera is second to none. It's incredible. It has real-time AF tracking, so it'll lock on the subject, lock on their eyes. If it can't, it'll lock on their face. If it can't, it'll lock on their head and their body, so on. It's the intelligent tracking, object tracking that Sony has. AF is top notch. We're going to talk about the 20 frames per second. Here it goes. Yeah, that's what 20 frames per second sounds like. It's extremely fast. And to top it off, there is a 200 shot buffer, so I will be deleting all these files. So if you're not careful, you can actually hit that buffer because that's 10 seconds. And if you're just rattling off like crazy, you can hit 10 seconds. It's not meant to be used with the mechanical shutter. So when you're using this camera and you're using this 20 frames per second, you will get carried away. It is a total speed demon. And another great thing about it is that it does 20 frames per second with no blackout, and I will let you see it right here. Unfortunately, the screen recording is in 24p, but just to give you a rough idea of what 20 frames per second looks like, here it is. Now it's recording 20 frames per second. And this is how the A9 looks like. It's really phenomenal. Okay, now we're going to look at the A7 III at 10 frames per second. You should notice some sort of banding, and the buffer is going to run out when it gets to around 60. And that stuttering, that's not really good, but it is what it is. So that's what makes this camera a little bit unique. It does 20 frames per second, and your display is going to be a continuous 120 hertz. It doesn't even look like you're recording video. You just have this black frame out on the side, the border, let you know that you're taking photos. An incredible experience for photographers. The IAF of this thing is incredibly sticky. If you're using third-party lenses and you want those lenses to perform good, this camera really comes in handy, because when you're using third-party lenses with this camera, it suddenly transforms into a new machine. They might not focus the best on other Sony cameras, and they won't even focus the best on this compared to fully native lenses. However, this camera will really push third-party lenses along. When you're adapting with the MC11, you'll get 10 frames per second as opposed to 3 or around 3 with the other cameras. The Tamron lenses or Sigma, then you'll get around 15 frames per second. If you want the full 20, then you have to get the Sony lenses. And there are many lenses, including this cheapo nifty 50, that can do 20 frames per second on this camera. Let's talk about other features that the A9 has. PET AF, f16 autofocus. So if you're using a 100 to 400, you can slap on a 2x teleconverter and you'll still have autofocus, even at, well, it's technically only f11, but at f11 you still have autofocus, and not all the Sony cameras can do this. So it is one of the advantages. The autofocus for video is very good. If you've been following my channel for a little bit, all of my past videos have been using the A9. I use the A9 for video because I'm usually using the A7 III in the field. So the A9 is typically sitting there. Right now I have a Panasonic. That's why the autofocus may go in and out on occasion. This is a full mag body. It has an Ethernet port and a flash sync port. Really old school stuff right here. There is no USB-C. It has the old school micro B and micro HDMI. Has a headphone and a mic port. The rear screen is only a tilt, but you know, if you're comparing sports cameras, the 1DX is a solid screen. It doesn't even have this tilt, and this one does have tilt up and down. It's certainly better than a fixed screen, but it is a limitation. The touchscreen you can touch, but the menus, not quite there yet. Another thing that it has that differs from the A7 III's is that it has this locking dial right here. This thing is locking, and there's 3 rather than 2 customs. When it comes to the firmware, there's this slight difference in that you can do a hold and scroll. The A7 III does not have the hold and scroll. Another small difference is that the menu system is a little bit better on this. It doesn't have the dreaded gray autofocus point. The menu system, when you configure this,
2 hours later,
the menu system has this picture of the camera and each button, while the A7 III is purely text, so it has a nicer UI. Even though this is an older camera, it got more updates than the A7 III. It has a little bit nicer menu. It has the real-time AF, real-time tracking AF, not just the real-time IAF. It has the real-time tracking. The body is slightly heavier. There's more mag alloy parts. You can't really tell that much. It's just a tiny bit heavier, like maybe 20 or 30 grams. This Z battery, if you're going off the shutter like crazy, you can really rack in literally thousands of images on one battery. That's if you're shooting sports and you have to shoot the heck out of it, or you just want to shoot the heck out of it, you can go thousands of images. The viewfinder on this is much clearer. It's more million dots. I can't remember exactly at the moment, but it is a lot clearer. And so when you're manual focusing, you'll appreciate that you know, if you do manual focus with this camera, it is a lot more clear. In case you don't know already, there's 699 autofocus points. Unlike the A9 Mark II, this one is UHS 1 and this one is UHS 2. It's an annoyance because your buffer will not clear as fast, especially when you hit that 200 mark. If you're writing to both cards, it won't clear as fast. When it comes to sensor performance, the compressed RAW is around 24 megabytes. Uncompressed is around 40 plus. The dynamic range is reportedly 1 stop less. However, I haven't been able to tell side by side just because I haven't ever had to push that hard, even though I take a lot of landscape photography. The high ISO is essentially a wash between them. They're both very good cameras when it comes to high ISO. So what do I use this for? I'm not a sports shooter. However, I do appreciate the amazing autofocus of this thing, because when you're taking photos and you want that perfect expression, this is the camera you want to use. If you have your kids running around, this is the camera you want to use. It just doesn't miss, and having a camera that doesn't miss is really nice to have. Another thing is that you may think that 20 frames per second is too much to work with, but I find that my workaround is that I simply star the images I like, and you know, a few of them in a row. So I liberally rate the images that I think are good. If an image looks good, okay, it should look good on a small display as well as a big one. But if it looks crappy on a small display, like my composition's off or something, you know, that translates to a big screen too. I mean, if the composition looks lame on the small screen, it looks lame on the big one, I don't rate it. And so when you're using this type of camera, you just have so many excess that you can just mark off a couple and they will be in focus. I mean, if you've marked off maybe 2 or 3 images in a row, one of them's in focus. Unless you've got just really poor settings and really low shutter speeds and you're not accounting for those type of things, poor settings, then you can have you could probably have like a lot of blurry shots if you don't know what you're doing with proper shutter speeds. When it comes to skin tones, I think it's pretty good. Like I've said, all of my previous videos were shot with this, and it's just on portrait style. I don't do anything spectacular when I'm doing these talking heads videos, so you can sort of get a idea of the color science just based on my videos. Generally no post-processing at all for these YouTube videos. In conclusion, I think that this camera is a fantastic sports camera. There's no question about the performance. I mean, when it comes to me, there are nags about this camera, and that's the buffer. That's the video aspect. You don't have any S-Log in here, and that's really annoying. I don't know why Sony does that with this camera and locks you out, does not let you take any log footage. This sensor is capable of 4K 120. I mean, it's a faster readout than the A7S III. Does not have 10-bit 422. Sony is definitely downplaying this. They've had this technology since 2017 and they simply downplayed this camera. Is it still worth it in 2020? And I think it comes down to the price. If you can snag one of these cameras for a little bit north of 2100, 2200, then I think it's a fantastic deal. Where else can you get this type of performance for that type of price? But you know, when you're getting this is an old camera. I would never pay $3,500 for this because the used prices, they're so low. I mean, you could just get a used camera for like 21 or 2200 for one of these, and it's an incredible camera for sports and actions and just for daily life. If you're the type of hybrid user that doesn't care for video much but care for photography more, you don't need really high megapixels, I would definitely take this over the A7 III because this thing is just a really different experience and a dream to use when it comes to photography. It doesn't really miss. It's a total monster. And if you guys enjoyed the video, please hit the like and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you on the next one. Thanks and have a good day.